Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very wonderful and new event, a networking event that's in Reading. And my name is Phil Aston, and I'm actually talking from the far west of Cornwall. So I've been able to attend this networking meeting without leaving my home all the way down here, which is fantastic. And a little bit of background to how I became involved in this. About a year ago, we held a networking event in Cornwall, and it's quite hard to actually get people together in this part of the world. It's so rural, and getting stuck behind tractors is very much something that happens. And we invited Dave Webster to come and talk at one of our online meetings. And from that, we could see the potential of how we could actually do virtual networking, but at the same time, look for how we could expand that. And this is one of Dave and Paul's ideas, how we could bring together virtual networking and real networking at the same time. So I'm very honoured to be able to be asked to host this first of these events. I'd like now to introduce two people who are in the panel with me, which represents just how far-reaching we can actually set these things up. And the first person is Paul, who's based down in Kent. So Paul, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hello Phil, hello everybody. As Phil just said, my name is Paul Goggin. I'm the owner of Innovo Consulting. I'm based down in Kent, and I basically help startups and small businesses to use their technology better. I met Dave Webster through Google+. We've been discussing things for a while now, and heavy advocates of Hangouts, and I thought that when Dave mentioned this Hangout was coming up, I thought it was a brilliant opportunity to see exactly how wide and how great the technology can be.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And now heading over to Sarah, who's in Switzerland. So tell us a little about what you do, Sarah.
Yeah, hi, Phil. Hi, everybody. Well, Sarah Santacroce. I'm based in lovely Switzerland, and I help small business owners increase their online presence so they can quit chasing clients and get found online instead. And I also specialize in LinkedIn. And I've also met Dave on Google+, and we've been in touch ever since. And so it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to hand over to Christine, who runs the Late Breakfast Club in Reading.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Late Breakfast in Reading and wider. The Late Breakfast runs events mainly in Oxfordshire and Berkshire. And I was a little late today because actually I've run another event this morning, a physical event in Chargrove. So today I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill. Should the fire alarm, for those people who are not in the room, go off, please leave by the exit that we entered by and out onto the street. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Will from Pitmans. Pitmans hosted an event for the Chartered Institute of Marketing a few years ago, and it was a very impressive event. It was really interesting, cutting edge, and it brought some humour to what can be a very dry topic. So, Will, please.
Hello everyone. I'll just introduce myself while the slides are getting set up. With an introduction like that, no pressure for me to make it both cutting edge and humorous and within 30 minutes. I shall do my best. As you can see from the slide, which hopefully is on the screens of those who are online, this is a talk which is going to focus predominantly on online, but particularly social media, and staying on the right side of the law. The reason why I'm focusing on social media is because at the moment most of the sort of legal disputes and problems that are arising online are happening within the social media arena, and that's really something that as lawyers and as a litigator, which is what I am, we're coming across very frequently, both in the fields of brand and reputation, but also in some other areas which perhaps you might not expect. So, talking of social media, what exactly do we mean by that? There are, of course, a wide range of different social media providers. They're not all of them securing very large degrees of market penetration, but a lot of them have different features, different characteristics that are worth being aware of, and from time to time we come across a pretty wide range of them. But of course, equally, this is not a talk to go into a great deal of detail about that. In the space of 30 minutes, I could talk about all the different varieties that there are, but I'm just going to make some basic assumptions. Firstly, everyone knows what the internet is. You all understand what I'm talking about when I talk about social media, and you all predominantly understand that there are a whole range of criminal offences that might be committed when you're online. That in itself is the subject for another day, and that there are all sorts of issues that you can get into in relation to sort of harassment and so forth. But I'm pitching this mainly at what I'm assuming is a business audience. I'm assuming that none of you are about to go running off and start harassing people, posting abusive messages or tweets threatening to blow up airports, although that has been known in the past. Even when you're online, these things apply, and a lot of people have been caught out that way. What I do want to do is just look at some of the big players in the social media world before we get into the grist of the talk. Biggest of those still is Facebook. I was berated for not having a separate logo for Google Hangouts. There are reasons for that, and that mainly is because Google Hangouts has not been the venue for any large-scale litigation as yet, which can't be said of Facebook. You can see from these figures, Facebook represents a very significant proportion of all of the adults who are online and using social media. Twitter also has a pretty high degree of market penetration. And there, I think one of the interesting things to note is that the majority of people are following friends. A lot of us who use Twitter for sort of business purposes don't really think of it in that light, but it is still predominantly a medium for people to communicate as friends. And one of the things that people forget is that when they're having a conversation with their friends, they're doing it in a public forum, and they're doing it in a way that is recorded permanently, and that has got people into all sorts of trouble in the past. LinkedIn, of course, we've got one of our panelists who's a specialist in this area, but it's also a very significant player in social media, and there are a lot of particular features of it that are relevant. So what can we learn from these statistics? Well, apart from the fact that obviously it pays to have a blue logo if you want to be successful in social media, there are some pretty unusual people on LinkedIn. Further statistics. Obviously, the internet generally is something which is extremely prevalent. I was actually slightly surprised by this statistic that it's only 2/3 of online adults that have a social networking site profile. I would have expected that to be a little bit higher, and these numbers are from a report in 2014, so that percentage may have gone up a bit. But even so, you can see that a very significant proportion of everyone who's online is using social media. But that's not the only thing they're online for. There are other things that people are interested in, and not that. But you know, they are going online for information. And a large majority of people, virtually everyone, uses search engines, and we all know the numbers for market penetration. Google is far and away the search engine of choice in this jurisdiction, but also globally, despite there being some strong contenders in some of the other jurisdictions. An increasing number of people using YouTube for information gathering purposes, and YouTube, of course, have recently been promoting themselves as a source of information and news, rather than just a medium to share videos of cats doing stupid things. There are also a significant number of people using online user reviews, and this is where social media and the user-generated content, if we put it a bit more broadly, that come from online user reviews starts to become really significant. That's a very high percentage of people who are online, who are looking to make purchasing decisions, and who are basing their purchasing decisions on online user reviews. And you'll notice that I've stressed user. These are not people looking for journalistic articles about a particular product, nor are they looking for sort of professional critics to review. They're looking for the average person who has gone out and bought the product and posted a few words about what they liked or didn't like, and the same goes for services. And that's particularly important because although a very significant number of the people who are making buying decisions use online reviews to make those decisions, only about 11% of the people who buy products online actually go ahead and post a review. That means that for every positive or negative review that you can get, it has a disproportionately heavy effect on other people's buying decisions about your product or your service. And as we'll come on to, that means that your brand and your reputation as perceived through the filter of online reviews is an extremely important thing to be aware of. So that was a very brief overview. I'm now just going to quickly run through the topics that I'm going to cover today. The first of those is really to look at the hardcore sort of brand reputation issues, looking at defamation, looking at the way in which brands can be seriously impacted through social media, either through your own or other people's social media feeds. Looking at some more specific problems that people can get into in relation to online advertising, and particularly some recent guidance that's been issued by the Financial Conduct Authority as to the ways in which people can get into trouble using online advertising and social media in particular for financial promotions. Looking at some employment issues, the ways in which the social media world impinges on the hiring and the firing of employees. Looking at some privacy considerations, and also looking at how you protect your rights online and what sort of rights you're giving away when you go online on someone else's platform. So, the first one of those, threats to reputation. Every business should know the answer to this question. What is your strategy for social media and who is in charge of it? Time and again, when we see problems arising involving social media and business brands, it's because the business doesn't know who is in charge, or they fail to properly define what their strategy is, how they are going to use social media. Now, this is an example which is a couple of years old. Actually, Christine would have seen this before, but it's a really good one, a really powerful one, to show some of the problems that can arise. This is about a nightclub in Dallas, Texas. They decided that they were going to promote themselves as the happening night spot in the area. They had a lot of celebrities coming there. They had a deal with a brand of domestic, a US sort of equivalent of champagne called Ace, and they sold a lot of it. And what they did was they got one of their waitress staff to post tweets from time to time about how lively the place was, about how much fun was happening there. And these are the sort of tweets that she posted. So on the night in question, some Dallas Cowboys had come in, American footballers, having a good time. They were celebrating after winning in a game. They bought some alcohol. They bought some more alcohol. And she tweeted about how much they were buying of this particular brand of champagne. So, it sounds like a pretty lively place. Sounds pretty happening. Unfortunately, and this is a tragic event, two of the Dallas Cowboys got in a car, drove off, and crashed. And one of them was killed. And the family of the dead player was suing the other family, the survivor, for negligently causing his death. Not good news. Not good news for the club, because almost immediately newspapers and everything else picked up on this relatively high-profile story, and they picked up on the fact that tweets have been coming from the club promoting the fact that there had been alcohol consumed before the crash. The nightclub shut down because their regulators came and investigated them for knowingly serving alcohol to someone who was intoxicated, a breach of their liquor license. And the waitress and various other members of staff were called as witnesses in the manslaughter proceedings because they were effectively involved in the circumstances leading to the player's death. So, from what might have been a fairly broadly defined strategy of showing what a fun and lively place this nightclub was, you can see that very quickly it all went rapidly downhill and the club got into an awful lot of trouble. And it was because no one was exercising any critical judgment about the sort of content that was being posted and recorded through Twitter and that subsequently ended up being used in evidence. And you know, my view is that really people who run a business where their licensing depends on them not serving alcohol to people who are intoxicated should probably have thought twice about posting evidence of the fact that they were doing just that on social media. Now, internal threats, all very well. What can you do about external threats? What can you do when it's someone out there in the wide world saying bad things about your business? And this is a question that everyone should be able to answer as well. How often are you going out online? How often are you searching your brand and making sure that the results that are returned are positive results? Because in the grand scheme of things, in the current market, in the way that the world works now, if you're having a meeting with a business you don't know, what's the first thing you're going to do to find out a bit more about them? You're going to go online, you're going to Google them, or Yahoo, or Bing, or whoever else. You are going to search, and the search results that come up can be very important. Now, names have been changed, but this is an example of a case that I was involved in, and my colleague David, who's sitting here, were also involved in. Our client, a lawyer, he had been setting up an online profile. He'd been soliciting reviews from satisfied customers. He was doing all the right things, and the positive reviews were coming in. Those positive reviews reflected very well on his business. They showed that everyone was very satisfied with him. He had an average of 4.5, 4.6 stars out of 5 on Google reviews. One day, this review appears. Now you can see very quickly the harm that might be done by a review like that, particularly the allegation that he paid for fake reviews, which undermines all of the good work that he'd done up until that point. The suggestion that he lost a very significant percentage of all of his cases. Obviously, any lawyer doesn't want that sort of statistic bandied around, but particularly when it's not true. And clearly a dissatisfied client. Now, just to compound matters, on Google reviews, people can mark other people's reviews as helpful. None of those other reviews had been marked by anyone as helpful. This review had been marked 3 times as helpful by 3 users who had read it. So, what could he do? He had to issue proceedings in the US to identify the anonymous poster. He found out that that poster lived in the UK. He instructed us, and we issued proceedings in the UK. Now, just as a sort of rough feel, I wonder how many of you sort of think that this perhaps isn't such a bad thing. You know, in the grand scheme of behaviour online, this isn't so terrible. It was pretty clear that the person who posted the review had no relationship with the firm. They'd never been a client. They'd been someone who was just living in this country. We were pretty sure at the time, we're still pretty sure, that the person had been paid to post the review by one of our client's competitors. £50,000 in damages awarded in relation to that one message, that one review on Google. And it was only 50 because we capped our damages. It probably would have been about 75, 80,000. So, you know, very serious, very significant for this guy's business and for his reputation in the broader community, and the court recognised that, the court accepted that. But that wasn't quite the end of the story. Who's heard of the Streisand effect? Barbara Streisand, anyone heard of her? Okay, so some numbers. 3850. Image number 3850 was part of a collection of 10,000 images of the Florida, well, of the US coastline that had been taken by someone who was submitting to Congress about coastal erosion. This particular image had a picture of Barbara Streisand's house. She wasn't very happy about that. She felt that it was an invasion of her privacy. She objected. At the point at which she objected, the grand total of 6 people had viewed that image, 2 of which were her lawyers. Right, anyone guess what the 420,000 number relates to? That was the number of people who, within a month of her issuing the lawsuit, had viewed the image. Okay, the Streisand effect. Don't stick your head above the parapet or it will get shot off. Clients are always warned it. Our client was warned it, but he was determined he was going to protect his reputation, and quite right too. Why shouldn't he? These are all reviews that appeared within a day of the reported judgment on Google reviews for his firm, and that's a selection of a very significant large number. Now, most of those we've been able to get scrubbed, but you stick your head above the parapet, people are going to come after you, and it's always worth factoring that in before you decide whether or not you're going to take action. So, we're racing through because I don't have a lot of time. Financial promotions on social media. We move now to a different sort of area. This is, I mean, equally important. You think about brand, you think about reputation. One of the key ways in which businesses in the financial sector can lose their reputation is by getting into trouble with their regulators. You think recently there was a case only a few days ago, landmark decision, seller of financial products, what we call death bonds. There's no time to go into it, but basically they had missold. They had failed to give the proper guidance. They'd been misleading. They'd been unclear. They'd made a lot of money selling these products, but they suffered a big fine, 75 million in fines for the director of the company who had sold these products contrary to the guidance under the FCA. Now, social media represents a bit of a minefield for people selling in this area because of character limitations. I'd always sort of thought of Twitter being the most heavily limited, but actually that first statistic, 25 and 90, that's the number of characters you get for an advert on Facebook. 25 for the header, 90 for the body, 140 for Twitter, 6 seconds of video for Vine, 500 characters for posts on, I'm not sure, Pinterest, I think. So, any communication which includes an invitation or an inducement to engage in financial activity is a financial promotion. If you put out a publication like that in the course of your business, you're subject to the regulation of the FCA, and the publication has to be fair, clear, and not misleading. All sorts of things can be an inducement to engage in financial activity. Click here to see details of our 0% interest credit cards is an inducement to enter into financial activity. So there's all sorts of things that can be pitfalls. People who promote fundraising on Kickstarter or a similar sort of fundraising platform. Now, if you do that once before you set up the business, it's probably not going to amount to regulated activity. But if you do it regularly, if that's your business is promoting other people's startups, then you are going to get yourself into trouble if you're doing that without having proper regard to the rules. It can be done. This is a tweet well under 140 characters because, as we know, those of us who use Twitter, you want to leave a bit of space for people to retweet and comment. You don't want to use up the whole 140 character allocation. This one is just over 100 characters, and it's an example from the FCA guidance. Spread betting and CFDs, trade pounds and dollars with us. Your capital is at risk and losses can exceed your deposits. So it can be done. You can cover off the guidance you need to give within the space, but you need to know that you're supposed to do it, and people can get into all sorts of trouble if they don't. So that covers your sort of external brand out there in the wider world. Now we think about employment, your relationship with your employees' relationship with you and your brand. I just said, when you're going to meet someone you don't know for the first time, what do? You Google them. Anyone ever looked up a job applicant on social media? Bad idea. Bad idea. What happens if you look the person up and you find out that they are gay, or you find out that they are coloured, or you find out that in some other way they have some particular characteristic which is protected under discrimination legislation? And then, for completely unconnected reasons to that, you happen not to want to hire them anyway. How are you going to show that it wasn't because of some of their protected characteristics that you have ended up deciding that you don't want to go ahead and hire them? If they make a subject access request under the Freedom of Information Act, probably the copies of the social media content that you've downloaded will be disclosable as part of that. You cannot unlearn what you have learned. And that is a problem, because once you know it, you've got to try somehow to put it out of consideration and show that you put it out of consideration in making your decisions about employment. So, the protected characteristics under the Equality Act: age, disability, race, religion and belief, gender, gender reassignment, orientation, marriage. A lot of these things, even if someone's got a private profile on Facebook, a lot of these things will be apparent from their surname, from other details that might be in the public domain within their Facebook profile or other social media profile. There might be a photograph on their Twitter account, for example. Now, I just mentioned this very, very briefly. It used to be quite a common practice among certain types of employers to force their employees to make subject access requests of the police, of law enforcement, in order to get details of spent convictions and things that wouldn't show up otherwise in searches. It's now prohibited under Section 56 of the Data Protection Act. Just well worth being aware of, because it's a current issue. Now, you've hired your employee, you've navigated the minefield of interviews and all the rest of it. Once they're working with you, what sort of issues can arise? You've got to have a privacy policy. You need to make sure that you are not overly intruding into your employee's private space. But, we'll come back to this in a second, privacy policy means exactly the same as it means to social media companies. It defines the scope to which you're able to invade privacy. It's not about safeguarding privacy at the expense of everything else. It's important to document certain rights that as an employer you have, and certain duties that as an employer you have in terms of invading that privacy. You should have a social media policy for business and personal use. A lot of businesses allow their staff to use social media within the work environment. It's good for networking, it's good for keeping aware of trends in a particular marketplace, but it can cause problems. Someone on work time sees a defamatory posting about someone else and retweets it using the work account. Big problems for the company. Someone sees a photograph which is an invasion of privacy and shares it using the firm's Facebook page. Again, serious problems. You need to have policies in place to guide that. You should have provisions about who owns people's social media contacts. Someone runs your Twitter feed for you. They build up a large number of followers. They've got the password. It's registered in their name. What happens when they leave? Who owns it then? Who owns people's LinkedIn profiles? Who owns all of the contacts that people have on LinkedIn profiles? All things that need to be thought about, all things which, quite frankly, I could spend half an hour just talking about that. But it's just a heads up, really, to be thinking about those sort of issues. Not going to go over all of those, but it's just important to be aware that there's an awful lot of things that you might need to be able to comply with in relation to social media, particularly where you run a Facebook page, particularly where you run a blog on your site that solicits user-generated content. You need to know who's posting to it. You need to be able to exercise control over that if necessary. So, privacy. I'm going to very quickly rattle through this. I said already, social media companies and frankly all big internet companies have privacy policies. Those privacy policies are not for the protection of consumers. They are not there to define how wide the individual's privacy is. A lot of people derive comfort from just knowing that there's something called a privacy policy there. The privacy policy is there in order to define how much information can be used within the scope of the Data Protection Act. When you accept the privacy policy, you're giving your consent for the purposes of the Data Protection Act to the use of all of the various different types of data which are defined within that policy. It, generally speaking, goes a lot wider than people realise. And why? Why do businesses, why do social media companies need that? Well, because of the way that they are structured, because of the way that they are funded. They need users, they need the data from users, they need to sell that data to advertisers in order to get revenue in, and the revenue drives growth, which enables them to get in more users. So that data, the harvesting of data, the use of data for targeted advertising, and for all of the other things that might be coming in the future, like sort of sale on to insurance companies and other things like that, you know, all of that is exactly how Facebook, with all of its bells and whistles, can be free to the end user. It's how Twitter is free. There is one relatively recent startup social media company called ELO, E-L-L-O, which seeks to do away with all of that. They sell themselves on privacy, they sell themselves on never sharing data with anyone, but the upshot of that is that they are a low bandwidth, very low res, low tech social media platform, because they can't offer all of the bells and whistles that could be offered if they had big ad revenue coming in from outside. I'm just going to skip through all of this and just come very quickly on to a final point. Just one other one for you, I suppose, to all be aware of, and that was there was a brief reference there to the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the DRIP regulations, both of which are in force. New investigatory powers legislation is coming in. The scope of what social media companies can be obliged to disclose to the state for investigatory purposes is going to be much wider. A much wider category of information is going to be retained in order to be able to comply with lawful requests that the state might make from time to time if you're using social media, frankly, if you're using the internet at all in the UK. And that's well worth being aware of. So finally, one of the other ways in which, I mean, brand is important to a point, but some people will host online things which are actually of much more value to them, their intellectual property. If you're an artist in particular, or any sort of working in any sort of creative media, the internet is a great platform for promoting your services, putting photographs that you've taken, videos that you've shot, details of artworks that you've run, putting it online. It's great, but it's vulnerable to people grabbing that and reusing it without licensing. People don't seem to understand that it is not lawful. You should maybe get a big sign like that whenever you try to download someone else's content, but you don't. Another issue, and just the last one for us to come on to on this, is that you also get some very curious consequences from the terms and conditions that people are required to sign up to when they go onto social media. You take a photograph, just to give a very quick example to wrap up, you take a photograph at a festival. You haven't read the ticket that says that any photograph you take is owned by the festival promoters, and you're just given a license to use it for non-commercial personal use. You post that photograph to a photo social media platform like Instagram or something like that. You don't read the small print that you've just clicked on to accept when you signed up, which says that any picture you post is assigned to Instagram or whoever, and that they have the right to exploit it in any way that they like, including commercially. You are purporting to assign a right that you don't have. And in those circumstances, Instagram can then end up in quite a big trouble if they start using your photographs, as has happened from time to time, to promote their services. They use the user's photographs, they post them, and suddenly the festival promoter is turning around and saying, well, hang on, that's a photo of my festival. Who gave you the rights to use that? And when it turns out that Instagram thinks it's the user, well, actually they never had the right in the first place to be able to assign it. And it happens all the time. And it happens, and you know, there are a lot of points in there, but the key point is when you sign up for these services, no one ever reads the terms. No one ever thinks about what it is that they're giving up and the rights that they're assigning. But you know, there's an awful lot in there which you probably ought to be aware of, particularly if you're concerned about, you know, the IP in what you're posting on the internet. So that was a whistle-stop tour. I've talked now for about half an hour. I'd said I'd wrap up there. I could go on, but that's probably as good a point as any to stop. Thank you all for listening, and if anyone's got any questions, I'll happily take those now.
Question in relation to the last point you made.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the Premiership football season, I believe the Premiership were putting similar constraints on spectators at the ground using their smartphones to take photographs. Do you know if that was lawful, or how can you police that kind of control when you've got maybe 30, 40, 50,000 people posting and using social media, taking instant photographs of sporting stars? What was the? I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm aware of it, and it's sort of the same principle as the festival promoter in my example. What they're concerned about is not so much that I go with my son and we take some photos and we put them on the computer at home and we show them to mum and say, look what a fun day we had at the football. They're not really fussed about that, so that's why they won't really police it at the point of the photos being taken. What they're concerned about is someone going away and commercializing that content, you know, posting reviews for money, or for that matter, given that they sell extremely lucrative television and photograph rights to people to come in and, you know, photographers to take pictures to sell to the national press, television companies to broadcast globally. For someone else to come in and be able to produce even low quality video or photographs from the match, which they're selling commercially, that's when they would start to get concerned, is probably too strong a word, but certainly interested, and that's where they would be going after those individuals, not so much to punish them, but to tap into that revenue stream and make sure that it's coming to them rather than into the individual's pocket.
On the example you gave a moment ago of the festival promoter,
yeah.
Obviously, is there any blame for the person taking the photograph and, you know, posting onto? Is there a case there that someone has to answer? Is there a fault there?
Well, it's a tricky one. I mean, in a sense, yes, the individual user is to blame, because they've entered into two contracts, one with the festival promoter and one with the social media platform, and they haven't understood when they entered into the second contract that they were doing something which was prohibited under the first contract. And so in that very technical legal analysis, they're to blame. However, the reality is that they haven't done that consciously. They haven't done that intending to make money out of it or anything else. They've done it because no one reads these terms and conditions. And the problem, when it arises, is really the problem for the social media platform, because they're the one that's made money out of it. They're the one that has exploited commercially something which actually, on a technical legal analysis, they only had a non-commercial license for.
Thank you, Will. That was excellent. Phil, have you got any questions from your side or your team?
One question I'd have is that you mentioned the Barbara Streisand effect.
Yeah.
How did it pan out for that particular client? Because it must be a fine balance about thinking, do I leave that one bad review up there and ignore it, or hope that it will soon be filled up with good reviews? Well, as you say,
well, I mean,
take action. What happens next?
Yeah, the volume of the bad reviews far outweighed the good reviews. There was a real sort of backlash, and that was part of the problem. It couldn't simply be ignored, because he depended very heavily on the internet for his business and for the type of people that were going to be coming or looking for him. A lot of them were going to be looking online. So he was really very keen to see an end to that. It was really the same reason that had driven him to go to the lengths of actually bringing the proceedings in the first place. But we were quite fortunate in one respect. Quite a number of the people who posted were all part of a particular community online, and obviously not thinking that we would go looking, they had been exchanging messages in the open on that forum about how they were going to post negative reviews, how they were going to punish him for having stuck his head above the parapet. and we were able to take the transcript of those conversations, show that to Google, and get a significant proportion of the negative reviews taken down quite quickly.
Okay. I have had a question from someone called Nina, who's watched the presentation, has really enjoyed it. Yeah. And she's saying, how does a lawyer, for instance, a company, become more present on social media? What's your actual approach to your own strategy?
Well, it's a combination of things, but I think the most important thing about social media is to remember that it is a social platform. I think a lot of lawyers struggle with it because they're so accustomed to just talking. Here's me, I've just been talking for half an hour and not letting anyone else get a word in edgeways. That's what we like doing as lawyers, but actually social doesn't work that way. If you just broadcast and never listen, you very quickly find that people aren't really very interested in what you have to say. It's much better to be involved in a conversation that's a two-way communication, to actually show that you take an interest in the wider area in which you practice, to enter into discussions with the people who actually work in that area. You can get all sorts of insights into the things that really matter to them that, as a lawyer, you won't necessarily pick up from any other source. And I think that's probably one of the key ways in which you sort of get the most out of it. But other than that, it's just devoting the time to it, making sure you're present on social media platforms regularly, and that you've got interesting things to say when you do pipe up.
And I guess talking about these kind of issues on social media is a way of raising profile for lawyers and indeed the kind of pitfalls.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
We have a question here, Mr. Chris.
Yeah.
I had a question about the Googling of social media lookups of potential employees.
Yeah.
Obviously, do it. But how would you suggest then that a company should protect themselves from their own image? Because if you employ somebody who's got a very bad online presence, that bad profile, that's potentially going to have a negative impact on your business. So
yeah.
If you're not allowed to look that up in the first place.
Well, if you're the sort of business that is particularly vulnerable to that, and there will be some businesses that are much more vulnerable than others, then you're going to have to make a decision about whether you want to run the risk of exposing yourself to a discrimination case. But I mean, if for example, you were, say, and this is drawn from something like a real life example, not one that we were involved in, but say you're a company that provides services to prisons. And you provide people who offer sort of services as guards, and you discover that one of your staff or one of your prospective staff likes to boast about the fact that at the weekend they go out and participate in S&M parties, and they've got photographs of themselves doing so. That's probably the sort of thing that's a legitimate matter for you to take into account in deciding whether or not you could hire them, for two reasons. Firstly, it legitimately shows a lack of good judgment that sort of information is freely available when you're proposing to work in an environment with prisoners and potentially sort of violent people. But secondly, it's a question of sort of what reflects on your brand. But in other circumstances, in other types of, if you were a different type of business, it really wouldn't be any of your concern, and it would be a matter that you would have to put very sort of clearly out of your mind for the purposes of making your decision. So I think part of it is that if you can make a good business case why you couldn't even be seen to have hired someone that had this sort of profile online, then your justification for doing that sort of searching is greatly improved. Otherwise, you've just got to have robust employment policies that the employee signs up to when they join, where they commit to a certain standard of behaviour, and then you take the necessary remedies in accordance with the employment law if you find that they haven't adhered to those policies.
I've got a question. Sarah would like to ask a question about LinkedIn privacy.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's not a question, it's just kind of a statement. I would just like to say, because I work with people on their LinkedIn profile a lot, and I always get the question, well, should I put a picture? Should I put my email, my phone number? And so I always say, well, use some common sense. If you want to make, get business out of this LinkedIn presence, well, yes, you do have to put your email address or your phone number. And so kind of measure the risk and the benefits. Is that, do you agree with that?
I agree with that completely. I mean, one of the areas that I haven't touched on, and which is quite important in that particular regard, is to do with cybersecurity and the ways in which certain businesses can really expose themselves to risk of penetration, particularly through social engineering or those sort of attacks, in circumstances where they are encouraging their staff to put a lot of personal information either on their website or on their LinkedIn profile in order to humanize them, to make them seem a bit more accessible. There's a balance to be struck. One of the things that LinkedIn is pushing, or has been pushing recently, is for people to put more information about the causes that they support. And that's all very well up to a point, but if you've put something on your LinkedIn profile that says that you support the Red Cross, it's not that difficult if someone wants to inject a virus into your business, or they want to install a Trojan horse, to send you an email with a link, saying, oh, well, we're writing from Red Cross, we want to conduct a survey of contributors. You're much more likely to respond to that because it actually seems to be pertinent to you than the sort of, scattergun approach that historically social engineering hackers have had to use. So I think, it is, you think about the vulnerability of your business to that type of attack, you think about how much of that personal information is really necessary, and then you just as you say, apply a bit of common sense and draw the line in the right place.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question from Richard Locke, who says, what stops terms and conditions being so much more clear and simple so that people can actually read and understand them? I guess in the age that we are with the internet, people are used to seeing small 140-character posts. So it doesn't make sense that terms and conditions could be simplified and people would adhere to them more.
Well, yes, if businesses wanted them to know what were in the terms. I mean, the fact is that, and the social media privacy policy is a classic example of this. It is ostensibly in relatively clear language, but it's not short, and it's hidden away through a hyperlink rather than being actually displayed on the page. There's no obligation to go to read through it in the way that in the old days with software, you used to have to actually sort of scroll down at least through the end user license agreement before you could click accept and go on to use your software. They don't want you to read it, because if you did, you'd be much more conscious of the types of information that they were monetizing, and you might be a lot more careful about what you say. Now, to take Facebook as an example, and I'm not picking on them, but they are a particularly good example of a company that's really exploited successfully the personal information that people put. The more cautious and circumspect their users are, the less value the information they're putting online has for targeted advertising. So it's not. There's nothing to prevent people from putting terms in a very clear and transparent way, except that it's often not in their interests that they should do so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Will.
Thank you.
Would you like to take a word?
Yes. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, and that brings us to the end of our presentation side of this event today. What I would like to say is a big thank you to our team behind the scenes. We have Phil, who masterminded the online, our virtual guests. We have Paul, that's done an amazing job with the technical equipment, the audio-visual equipment. We have Dave, who set up all the webinar and did all that background, as well as helping me with the marketing. And we have Chris, who has been a lovely host for our physical venue today. So thank you very much. Please keep an eye on the Google group and also the Late Breakfast website for any future events that we might want to organise. I have had an inquiry this morning about organising another event in Oxfordshire, so you would be welcome to join us then. So thank you to our virtual people, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Wave.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
We're all waving to you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
And our physical people. if you'd like to help yourselves to tea and coffee, and we could do a bit more physical networking.